Welcome to the Wing Wag. I'm your host, Jack O'Lynn. I'm an instrument-rated pilot and the owner of an aviation company and flight school here in Central Florida.
This podcast is for informational purposes only and is not guaranteed to be accurate or complete. While we research each topic, we are humans and occasionally make mistakes. For the most up-to-date information on regulations, check out the official Federal Aviation Regulations, also known as the FARs, or consult an aviation attorney. Lastly, the opinions expressed on this podcast are the guest's opinions and are not necessarily the opinions of the host or podcast. Welcome to this week's episode of the Wing Wag. Today, I wanted to do something just a little bit different. I wanted to answer the 5 most common questions that I receive from my non-pilot friends. So we'll just get right into it. So the first question that I hear all the time is, why are there so many plane crashes lately? And when I hear this question, I really hear 2 questions. One, what is actually causing these plane crashes? And is it getting more common? Are plane crashes becoming more common? Is aviation becoming less safe? So we'll start talking about like what actually causes plane crashes. So I found this study online. I'll put a link to it in the show notes. It said that over 50% of plane crashes are due to pilot error. So this could be due to a pilot not receiving sufficient training in that particular aircraft that they're flying. A common thing I've heard of is a lot of airplanes, they'll have like 2 wing tanks of gas, and there's a little fuel selector valve between the 2 on the floor that you use to determine which tank is currently flowing into the engine. And a lot of them have 4 settings. Off, no gas is flowing. Left, gas is only flowing from the left tank. Right, it's only flowing in the right tank. And both, it's flowing from both. And so a common thing you'll hear is a pilot ran out of gas, but it turns out that the fuel selector gauge was set to just 1 tank. And so that 1 tank was empty, but they still had the complete other tank, but they just didn't think to switch the fuel selector over to the other side. There's also the problem of communication in the cockpit, where this is more for bigger planes like airliners, where you have a pilot and a co-pilot, where the co-pilot, for instance, notices that something is not right, but they're too scared to say anything because they don't want to offend the pilot. And there's actually a really good show about this on HBO. It's a comedy show by Nathan Fielder, if you guys know who that is. But in season 2 of this show, it's called The Rehearsal. He goes into this exact problem, like trying to improve aviation by trying to come up with a plan for co-pilots to feel comfortable expressing problems that they see to the pilot. And it's really great. So yeah, like I was saying, the study said that over 50% of plane crashes are just due to pilot error. And then something like 20% is due to engine failure or mechanical failures in general. And then maybe 10% is due to weather. And then what does that add up to? Like 50, 70, 80? So like 20% to all other factors that it could be. So yeah, the big one, pilot error, mechanical failures, and weather. So that's what's causing the majority of plane crashes. So the next part of this is aviation getting more dangerous? Are plane crashes more common? It seems like we hear about plane crashes in the news all the time. And just in my city, in the last year, there have been 3 plane crashes where an airplane just landed on a road. I think the investigations aren't out yet, but the common, like, the talk around town seems to be that they ran out of gas. But it seems like every other day I'm hearing about some sort of plane crash in the world. And it's easy to think that aviation is getting less safe for one reason or another. But that's actually not true. Over the decades, aviation has gotten safer and safer, especially when you're looking at commercial aviation with airlines. Things like ADS-B, which reports your location, like it beams your location out for all other aircraft in the area, as well as air traffic control. TCAS, the Traffic Collision Avoidance System, which alerts pilots when another plane is close by. Things like this have greatly improved the safety of aviation, not to mention GPS since like the 90s. Now, current day, airlines are measuring their crash rate in like crashes per millions of flight hours. So the commercial aviation is very, very safe. It's much more dangerous to drive a car on a trip than it is to fly on an airline. When you're talking about general aviation is significantly more dangerous than commercial aviation. The pilots are generally less trained. They might be doing more risky things. But even with that, general aviation has gotten safer over the years, just for the same reason, for technology, right? The technology that you see in a small plane might be almost on par with what you would see in maybe a small airliner. So why does it seem like we're hearing more about crashes? So one, it's kind of sensational and everybody wants to hear it. Like, it's an interesting story. And so if there's a crash anywhere in the world, we're likely to hear about it because, yeah, like I said, it makes a great story. But you have to consider like how many flights are happening every single day. Millions of people are flying every day, probably on thousands of flights. And so if we see a small number of them per year, that still is a tiny, tiny, tiny percentage of the total flights. It could also just be a product of statistics. Like, for example, if you take like a square, a cardboard square, and then you take like a handful of sand and just drop it onto the cardboard, you should expect the sand to be roughly evenly spaced on the cardboard because you just threw it down randomly. But if you look closely, you should see like pockets where there's a lot of sand bunched up, and there should be some areas where the sand is a little bit sparser, right? And the same thing applies to something like plane crashes. Like, if plane crashes are randomly occurring throughout time, you should expect to see that they are roughly evenly spaced, but there will be moments when the plane crashes are bunched up, when you see a lot of them, but then you should also see moments where they're very sparse and you don't see very many plane crashes at all. So it could be that we're just in a moment where we are reverting to the mean. In the last couple of years, like I know 2023 in particular had a very low number of plane crashes comparatively. But if you zoom out and look at like aviation from the beginning, it's definitely getting safer. The number of plane crashes is decreasing as a percentage a lot, even considering that the number of flights has increased dramatically in the last couple of decades. All right, number 2, what do you do when your engine dies? And so for me, this is purely hypothetical. I've never been in a true engine out situation, only simulated in training. And so I'll start with this. Engine outs are very rare. Like, they do happen. You do need to be prepared for them, because if you're not prepared, it could cause a lot of problems, obviously. But they are very rare, especially if you know that the plane is being well maintained, you are well trained, and you don't do things like I mentioned at the beginning where you're not checking the fuel selector valve to make sure you're pulling from the correct tank. It should be a very rare occurrence. But we can talk about what I would do based on the training that I received. The first thing you do in an engine out is establish the best glide speed. So every airplane has a speed that gives you the longest range of your glide. And that speed, like in the Cessna, is something like, in Cessna 172, like the standard trainer, it's probably like 68 knots, maybe 70 knots. And you want to get to that best glide speed to give you the most time to think and consider before you're having to worry about landing. Next, we're going to look for a suitable landing place on the ground. If you're lucky enough that there's an airport nearby, then turn towards that airport. An empty field, golf course, a road with not too much traffic and without power lines too close would be good. Water if you have to. Just anywhere you think you can get the plane down safely. And at this point, you're mostly looking for places where you can have a safe landing for you, the pilot, and your passengers, not necessarily a safe landing for the plane. But I mean, if you can save the plane, great. But that's not your priority. And then once you've established your best glide speed, you have an idea of where you're going to land, then we get to the restart checklist. Like I said, it could be something just as simple as the fuel selector valve is set to the wrong tank. So we'll go through and verify that everything's correct. So we'll make sure the fuel selector valve is where we want it. We'll turn the carb heat on. So the carb heat is a feature that applies heat to the carburetor. And sometimes when you're flying, you can get ice in the carburetor and that can choke the engine and cause it to stop running. So we'll turn the carb heat on and melt some of that ice if it's there. We'll make sure that our mixture is full rich and we'll attempt a restart. If that restart fails, then we'll go ahead and we'll secure the plane as if we're going to land. We'll turn off the mags, cut the fuel. We'll squawk 7700. I should know this, I'll look it up. And you can declare an emergency on the emergency channel 121.5. And then you start, at that point, now you're just focusing on landing, right? Make sure that your spot looks good. Make sure that you're having a good approach. You're scanning and making sure everything looks good. Open the door so that you can make a quick escape once you get on the ground. And then try to make it the softest, slowest landing that you can do. But if you follow everything right and there's a good landing spot, an engine out is not the end of the world. The plane is perfectly capable of landing safely without the engine. You just don't get the added benefit of being able to go around if you're not happy with your approach. I will say, probably the worst place to have an engine out is over a big city because it's hard to find a good landing place. So just keep that in mind when you're flying over a big city. Maybe stay at a very high altitude where you could glide, there's a lot of choices within gliding range. Number 3, is turbulence dangerous? I hear this one from my wife all the time. So I'm sure you all have had this feeling of being in an airliner and it hits turbulence and the plane starts shaking up and down a little bit and the pilot comes on and says that everybody needs to be in their seat and that they need to be buckled up. And it can be a little scary if you don't know what's going on. But the reality is, in most cases, turbulence is perfectly safe. Nothing bad is going to happen. Of course, there could be extreme situations where you're maybe close to the ground and the turbulence brings you into the ground, or a very, very strong turbulence that's able to damage the airplane. But these situations are relatively rare. In the normal turbulence that you feel when you're just cruising, like in cruising flight on an airliner, is perfectly safe. To start with, the airplanes are way over-engineered. For example, they're tested, all the tolerances for the different components of the airplane are tested at multiple times what they would actually be used for in normal flight. And so adding a little bit more load to the wings, for instance, during turbulence, is still well within the operating limits of those parts. And to demonstrate, there's a cool video online of the Airbus factory in France, and they're testing the deflection of the wing. And so the wing starts out horizontal, and then they pull it up to like a very, very steep angle. And it's very kind of weird to see like a metal wing bending so much like that. And then when they release it, it just goes back down, no damage, no nothing. So just like little wobbling that you see out the window during turbulence is well within specs. The main problems of turbulence are actually just, one, if the passengers are up, like standing up, them like getting bounced around the cabin, hitting their head on something, or maybe just the passengers being uncomfortable. But the plane is not really in any serious danger. So another thing I thought of about this question is what is the pilot actually doing during turbulence? Like, is the pilot doing anything to kind of counter it? Even though it's not dangerous, like the pilot does want to make sure that the passengers are comfortable and safe within the cabin. Like I said, they're not bumping their head on anything. So what is the pilot actually doing? And in general, not too much. At least like when I'm flying in one of our planes, the Taylorcraft or the 170, and we experience turbulence, mostly I'm trying not to like white knuckle the plane and over control it and just kind of let it, if we hit an updraft, for example, and the plane wants to go up, let it go up a little bit and then maybe gradually bring it back down afterwards if we need to. Like maybe your initial reaction might be, if you feel the plane going up, to like give it and like jerk it down a little bit, but that's what you should not do that. You should let the plane fly in the air Don't over control it, keep it smooth. And then once you're through the turbulence, then like reset to the altitude that you want to be at. So yeah, turbulence is not a big deal. Number 4, how much time and money does getting a pilot's license really require? So this is a complicated one because there are many factors, and the ultimate range of both of these values is gigantic. And so probably in the future, we'll do a whole episode on this, so we'll just briefly touch on it. If you're very dedicated, you do a lot of outside study on your own so that you go into the flight training already having a good theoretical idea, and you're going to a cheaper flight school like Olinda Aerospace, you could probably do it in about $8,000, but that would be under the most perfect of circumstances. Private pilot's license requires 40 hours, but many pilots frequently spend a lot more than 40 hours in their training. I personally spent 75 on my training. I know that might be kind of extreme, but that's just what I needed to be ready to pass the check ride. And when an instructor signs you off to go on a check ride, and then the DPE, the examiner, signs you off and gives you your license, they are kind of vouching for you to the FAA that this person is a good pilot and is capable of flying a plane. And they're not going to do that if you're not ready, even if you have more than 40 hours. So the price is kind of highly determined on how fast of a learner you are, I guess. And so I would say if you want to get a pilot's license, there are ways to save money and make it cheaper, but do plan on spending money and having like a contingency budget for that situation. If you go to one of the bigger schools that's more expensive, yeah, you could easily be looking at like $12,000, $15,000 minimum for the 40 hours, and then just going up from there. Time-wise, that's also variable. Like I said, the minimum is 40 flight hours, but you can space that out however you want, right? You can fly an hour a week for 40 weeks or 50 weeks, 60 weeks, however many hours you need. Or you can try to like cram it all into just 2 or 3 weeks, which some people do. And there are, I guess, benefits to both. Like if you spread it out, then you have more study time between flights. If you are in fact studying, you have more time to accumulate money. Whereas if you cram it all into 2 to 3 weeks, yeah, like everything is staying fresh and you're like not forgetting stuff in between lessons, but then you have to have all your money ready like right in that moment. And you also don't have that much time to study theory between your lessons. So there are different ways, but you definitely have to have some regularity of flights. Like if you're doing like a flight a week and then every now and then you'll take a month off, then that's going to greatly prolong your flight training. Just because every time you come back from one of those long breaks, your instructor is going to have to like teach you some of the basics over again. So part of the reason, like I said, it took me 75 hours. Part of the reason was I was doing my training during COVID and I had to switch schools. I was in college at the time and I was training up in my college. And then during COVID, I came back home to Florida and switched schools to a school here in Florida. And just that switching of schools set me back a lot because then the new school wanted me to re-show what I knew, and that took several flight hours, and yeah, it was a hassle. But these things do happen, and they have to be accounted for. And then another thing to consider is once you get your license, what kind of time and money do you want to invest in flying? Because the sad reality is that most people get their license and then rarely fly. And then they just lose their currency and they have their license. Their license doesn't expire, but they just never use it. They don't get their biannual flight reviews. And so I would also make sure that you do plan on having some commitment to flying after getting your license, even if it's only one flight a month, just to stay current. Maybe go up with an instructor, but do budget for it, time-wise, budget for it, money-wise, and that is better than nothing. I have some friends ask me, they'll say things like, oh, I have a family right now. I want to get my pilot's license, but I don't think I'll have a lot of time for it. Or I'm not sure what to do. And yeah, like you can, like I said, you can do the very spread out training followed by like not a lot of flying, and that's totally fine if you want to spend that time and money, and then just not use it. I don't know why you would, but it's not quite like other hobbies where you can just do it when you feel like doing it. You should treat it like maybe a little bit more on the hobby side than work, but it's somewhere in between like work and a hobby where you do have to practice it. You do have to dedicate time and money to it if you want to improve, if you want to stay safe. Like especially like if you plan on flying with your family, you definitely have to stay current. You can't just be flying once every 2 months and then take your family on a trip without being proficient. So yeah, it's a big investment. I personally think it's really worth it. I love flying. At the time when I got my pilot's license, I spent all of my money on it. All my entire savings I wiped out. I didn't regret it at all. It's been great. Do you seriously start your airplane with your hands? This is of course a reference to the Tailorcraft, which does need to be hand propped. Yeah, maybe we'll do an episode later about hand propping. But so the Tailorcraft is from the 40s. It does not have a starter. So the only way to start it is hand propping. So yes, we do seriously start the plane with our hands. It can be dangerous. It looks dangerous. But if you have the right technique, you can greatly diminish the probability of something bad happening. There are also precautions that we take when we're hand propping an airplane. Like, for example, they say remove hat, sunglasses, like loose items like a necklace, rings, anything that could possibly fall off and like cause you to have an instinct to reach for it. You take it off. So there's no risk of that. Don't hand prop on slippery ground where you might slip. And always, whenever you're hand propping, always do it in a way where your momentum is traveling away from the propeller so that in the event that you do fall, you will fall away from the moving propeller and then under it if the plane moves forward. So yeah, it can be done. It's not hard. It can be done safely. And it's kind of fun, honestly. And it looks cool. People comment about it. And then whenever we're at the airport, like the old guys like to come and offer to do it for us, which is fun. But yeah, like I said, we'll go into the details of this in another episode. I will say there is one benefit to not having the starter, and that's just we save a lot of weight for the starter, right? The Tailorcraft is small. It doesn't have that high of a useful load. And so we try to cut weight whenever possible, and not having a starter just helps with that, especially with such a small engine that's so easy to hand prop. In my opinion, it just doesn't make sense to install a starter in it. But yeah, that's it. Those are my answers to the 5 most common questions that I get from my non-pilot friends. And if you have any other questions that you would like me to answer in a future video, write it in the comments, and hopefully we can do more of these in the future. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for listening to The Wing Wag. If you liked this episode, please consider subscribing. And if you're out flying today, make sure to give somebody a wing wag.